all to our Friday webinar series. And Indermit, you'll be happy to know we have more than 310 webinars done so far.
Oh, wow.
Five Nobel laureates have already been with us, and we have had a very good blend of Indian speakers and foreign speakers. And we have had a blend of many issues, economic issues, obviously, socio-economic issues, poverty. We had under the G20 done programs on new international economic order, women empowerment, climate, and then because of the Trump tariffs, we have done 6 of the lectures on Trump tariffs. So very, very contemporary issues being discussed at EGROW. So we are very happy that we are able to cover most of the contemporary issues, both domestic as well as international. And our audience is again very global. We get people from different parts of the world in our audience. So you'll be happy to know that. You'll be also happy to know that from the World Bank, we have also had presentations, and from the IMF, we have had presentations at EGROW. So to that extent, we're able to disseminate the knowledge which is being generated in this multilateral institutions across the planet. And I can assure you, some of the people who join us at EGROW for these webinar series are for very remote parts of India. And the presentations are used even for assignments. Even today, now that you have changed the topic, I do not know, but the debt question had already been posed an assignment to one of the MBA classes. And they told me they wanted a recorded copy as early as possible. So that is how the knowledge that is being generated in the world, anywhere in the world, is now being used in our country. As we had started the think tank, we had thought we would be doing something like what NBER does. We will be doing something for the continent of our area, the South Asia region, as well as our country. We're very happy that you agreed to come and speak to us on some of the very important issues. The debt issue is of course important, but where's the world economy headed? And I'm sure you are going to have a slide or two on debt in it, because we cannot talk about the world economy without discussing about the debt. And when we started our economic careers in the, I'm sure you started at the IMF, I started at the Reserve Bank. We were all wedded to the Maastricht Treaty, and 3% and 60% were embedded in our memory chips. Anywhere we see a deficit more than 3, we would say there's a crisis looming. Anywhere we see a debt more than 60, we would say, hey, the doomsday is here. And now nobody is in that range, and everybody is way ahead of it. So where is the world economy headed is a really genuine question. So to discuss this issue, while we have you here, Indermit, we have requested Dr. Bhalla, Surjit Bhalla, to chair the session today. And there was a very specific reason. Of course, he's the advisor to our EGROW, but he was also at the IMF as the executive director. Before that, he was a member of the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council, and he has been extensively involved in public debate on precisely these type of issues. So we have invited him to chair the session. Let me briefly introduce Indermit. The first and foremost thing is Indermit is a dear friend. When I was at the IMF, I used to interact with him extensively. And if you remember his book that he came out with, The Economic Geography, I thought that was a path-breaking book, the World Bank's development report. And there was so much of discussion around it. I do not know, Indermit, if you would agree, but I would say it was before its time. It is now seeping into the world how important the economic geography is. And you had brought it out in 2009. So I think that was way ahead of the time. And to briefly introduce Indermit, he is the chief economist of the World Bank Group and senior vice president for development economics. Before starting his position on September 1, 2022, He served as the World Bank's Vice President for Equitable Growth, Finance and Institutions, where he helped shape the bank's response to the extraordinary series of shocks that have hit developing economies since 2020. Between 16 and 21, he was professor of public policy at Duke University and non-resident senior fellow at the Brookings Institution's Global Economy and Development Program. As I've mentioned, he led the World Bank's influential report of 2009. The report was on economic geography. His work included introducing the concept of the middle income trap to describe how countries stagnate after reaching a certain level of income. And Indermit, I must share this with you. As economists in our country today, many of us are worried about the middle income trap. While we are chasing the dream of Fixit India, developed India, but many of us are worried that how will the journey be really playing out? Indermit has extensively published on key policy issues facing developing countries, among other things, sovereign debt vulnerabilities, green growth, and natural resource wealth, labor markets, and poverty and inequality. Name it, he has worked on it. He has taught at Georgetown University and the University of Chicago. He is from St. Stephen's, Delhi. Then he did his studies at Delhi School, and then, of course, a PhD from Chicago. With this, I hand over the session to Bhalla sir to take the proceedings further. Sir, over to you.
Thank you, Charan, and welcome Indermit. It's an absolute pleasure to chair a seminar by Indermit. If I can say that Indermit has been a very close friend of mine for more than 30 years, and I'm proud to say that I wrote a recommendation letter to him for graduate school in 1982. Age is both of us, but facts are facts. And now coming to the topic, I had prepared some opening remarks on which we as chairs are supposed to do on the looming global debt disaster. And that what I had written was that some facts that I hope come out, and I will quickly change over to where the world economy is headed, but one would like to know, and if there are some papers, etc., I know the bank fund meetings are coming up, is what's the share of Chinese debt amongst those that might be facing a disaster, and a tabulation of countries according to debt disaster for the last 20 years. And so how good the forecasts have come out of the bank and the fund. Obviously, both are involved, very able sister institutions. Now looming forward to the world economy, where's the world economy headed? Actually, I'm much more interested in this topic because my livelihood depends on it. I speculate in the stock markets. So this is a rather important, but seriously, I hope what comes out is a comparison of the world economy by regions, and China, India, and Indonesia in particular. And there are reasons why one is interested in all three of them. And some comments on employment, which is a subcomponent, obviously, of growth. And I don't know if you say something about whether Trump has affected the growth positively or negatively, and if so, why? So over to you, Indermit. Really looking forward to this.
Thank you, Surjit. Thank you very, very much. And I consider you a mentor. So it's truly a pleasure to actually speak here. And thank you, Charan, for inviting me. I'm sorry to change the topic, but the reason why I changed the topic, Surjit, was because we just published a book on investment. And we looked at what's happening to public investment, to private investment, and to foreign direct investment over the last 2 decades and so on. And in some sense, Charan, when you look at investment, it's the opposite of debt in a sense. So, I mean, essentially what you sort of see is all the bad things that are happening on debt you see it reflected in all the bad things that are happening on so all the bad things that are happening on investment. And by the way, it's across the board. It's public investment, it is private investment, it is foreign direct investment, it is in advanced economies, it is in emerging markets, it is in low income countries, it is across the board. Okay. And so so please do look at our report. It's called Accelerating Investment and it's on the web. We just published it last week. So I thought I'd give you a quick view of that. We also put out forecasts at this time, though we normally don't actually, we don't publish them because we have a division of labor with the IMF, which is that during our annual and spring meetings and autumn meetings, it's the fund that puts out the World Economic Outlook. And in the summer and the winter, we put out the Global Economic Prospects Report. But the Global Economic Prospects Report doesn't show that much of an effect of the Trump policies, by the way, because in fact, we've actually upgraded our forecast. So we had downgraded our forecast in June for the world economy to 2.3%. We've actually upgraded it again to 2.6% because the economy over the last quarter or so has actually done well, both the US economy as well as other. Now we can talk about why it has done well, and you find that in a lot of countries, what you find is that that especially the important economies, they're being juiced by big fiscal deficits. So if you sort of see it, it's exactly the problem of debt in a sense. There almost seems to be an addiction to debt in advanced economies as well as in the larger emerging market economies. That, I mean, in the sense that you normally sort of want to use debt as a way to apply counter-cyclical measures. That's not the case right now. It's just it goes up during bad times and it goes up again during good times. Yeah. So if you sort of look at the fiscal deficits in the larger economies like the US, like Brazil, like India, like South Africa, you name it, it's actually fairly sizable, 5% and up. Yeah. Now, so as a result of that, what's basically though is that what I'm going to show you slides is on slightly longer term prospects, and then we can come back to what's actually happening this year again. Joe, you want to go to the next slide? No, actually stay. No, stay right there. Stay right there. Actually, stay right. Yeah. So I'm going to sort of actually just talk with you about number 1 and number 2, and then if you want, and then I'm going to switch to number 5. Okay. And then what we can do is during the conversation, you guys can ask me questions about what we should do about it. So I'll quickly go through this, and I'm hoping that I have about 10 or 15 minutes, Surjit. Is that okay?
Absolutely fine. Yeah.
Okay. All right, Joe, go to the next slide. So here are the 3 big things that are happening. If you look at GDP growth rates, they have been falling over the last 2.5 decades. Okay. I'm talking about actual GDP growth rates and potential GDP growth rates. So actual GDP growth rates are actually somewhat lower than potential growth rates, but potential growth rates have been falling. So for example, if you look at emerging markets and developing economies, in the first decade, the potential growth rates were about 6%. In the second decade, it was 5%, and in this decade, it's 4%. These are huge decreases in potential growth. If you look at advanced economies, it's actually even sharper. Of course, advanced economies have lower potential growth rates, but in the first decade of this millennium, it was 2%. Right now, it is about 1%. Okay. And then if you look at a big part of this, of course, is falling investment growth rates. And I'll show you some slides that show that both public and private investment have both been falling. And then we'll talk about the reasons for this. I think there are 3 reasons that investment falls. One, of course, is policy, is greater amounts of policy uncertainty, and those and that has spiked over the last few years, and it has come down a bit this year now, but it's come down because people have sort of got resigned to higher tariffs and things like that. So the policy uncertainty is down, but it's not necessarily the case that potential growth rates would be going up. In fact, potential growth rates are probably going down even faster. And then I'll also sort of talk about debt, because debt, once you have high levels of debt, it's very hard to get investment into countries where debt levels are going up a lot, because debt tends to have three effects. The first effect, of course, is that to the extent that it means higher debt financing costs for governments, usually the first thing that falls is public investment. The second thing that happens, of course, is that governments tend to borrow a lot more at home, and they crowd out the private sector. And that means that the private investment rates go down. And then the third thing that happens is that debt causes greater uncertainty. And when you have an uncertain amount, when you have uncertainty, you get both public investment, both domestic and foreign, coming down. And that's basically what has happened. Now, you can always offset that by improving the investment climate, however you measure it and so on. But the way that we measure it, we find that the investment climate in emerging markets has not improved. If anything, it has come down a bit over the last 2 decades. And then if you look at in the investment climate in advanced economies, it's also not improved. So let me quickly show you the slides on declining growth rates first. Don't look at the colors in these slides, but just look at the size of the bars. And you sort of see over here is what I was telling you about is a fairly sharp decline in potential growth rates on the right side, B, right? So you see, for example, for emerging markets, I told you that it was about 6%, then 5%, and then down to 4%. Advanced economies have halved. If you look at the left side, you actually find that actual growth rates are, of course, even lower in emerging markets and developing economies. And one of the things you see over there is that the share of investment has been going down. And what has happened is that private consumption has actually kept the growth rates up. Okay, net exports have also come down. Next slide, Joe. Yeah. So here, if you look at this, basically what you sort of see is that in emerging markets, if you look at first look at panel A, and what you see is that in the first decade of this millennium, you see fairly sizable investment growth in emerging markets. And if you look at emerging markets excluding China, I know that you're interested in China too. You actually see that investment growth is lower in the 2000s, but it was much higher than what you see right now. So if you look at 2010 to 2024, for the last 14 or 15 years, what you sort of see is basically a halving of the investment growth rates. Okay. Then if you look at the right panel, you see that this is true of private investment. If you look at panel C, you see that it's true of public investment. And if you look at panel D, you see that that FDI flows to emerging markets and developing economies have fallen a lot, have fallen massively. Next slide. And then if you look at the things that are correlates of this, of course, you see global trade growth has dropped a lot since, not just since 2000s, but also since the last decade before the pandemic. You see that global trade growth has fallen to about half of the level that it was growing at before. And then if you look at the other part, which is economic policy uncertainty, you see that has spiked. It spiked from about somewhat less than 100 to close to 300. Okay. Keep going, please. Next slide. Okay, so then if you sort of look at this, so here's a chart that looks at the debt part, which is the flip side of investment, is essentially, and you see for emerging markets and developing economies, you see this basically a doubling of debt to GDP ratios between the 2000s and this decade. And then if you take out China, you still get that increase, okay? And then if you look at low-income countries, we are particularly interested in them because these are the countries that have actually a sizable number of people still, and they tend to have, the source of these data are a report that we just put out. It's called Accelerating Investment, and it is on the web. Okay, so if you put Accelerating Investment World Bank, you'll actually see it. Okay, and then if you look at the low-income countries, what you see is that between the first decade and the second decade, you see a drop. That drop was because of the highly indebted poor country initiative and the multilateral the HIPC initiative and the MDRI, right? And basically what you sort of see is that because of that debt relief, you get a drop, but then you sort of see this massive increase there too, that you see a reversal of that trend very, very quickly. Yeah. Please keep going. Next. And then here, what you sort of see in this thing is that you can see the regional disparities here, which is investment per worker relative to advanced economy levels. And you sort of see that, of course, this is improving a lot in the South Asia region. That is in that is in panel B. And if you look at that, it's a comparison between 1980s to now. And you sort of see a big increase in investment per worker in emerging markets relative to advanced economy levels. But they started from very, very low levels, like 2-3% to about 8-9% now in the case of South Asia. If you look at investment per worker in emerging markets overall, you see that a large part of the increase since the early 2000s relative to advanced economy levels is essentially because of China. Okay? If you take China out, you actually see that emerging markets and developing economies outside of China don't really sort of see investment per worker in that compared with advanced economy levels, they actually, there does not seem to be any convergence in that. Okay, keep going, Joe. Joe, next slide. Joe, next slide, please.
Are you seeing it, Indermit?
No, nothing. It's not changing.
There's a lower interval.
I think there might be a lag. So just there might be a lag.
But on my screen, it's private investment shares are lower in developing countries.
I'm just saying catch up until early 2010s. I don't know what others are saying. Yeah. Okay. So right here. So a worsening investment climate. So I think part of the reason also is that you sort of see that there hasn't been much of an improvement in the investment climate. However you measure it, actually we measure it in different ways. So this is between the 1990s, the 2000s, and then over the last decade and a half, you see that's pretty flat for emerging markets and developing economies. For advanced economies, it's the same. It's a better investment. I'm sorry, I'm looking at a different chart now. Sorry. So this is the share of private investment. I keep going on to the next slide. No, I wanted you to show the investment climate slide. Yeah. So here,
you see it now?
Yes. So here what you sort of see is that the investment climate don't see much of an improvement between the first decade of this thing and the last one, right? So you don't see much of an improvement. In fact, you see a bit of a worsening of the investment climate. And if you look at advanced economies, it's pretty bad. I think some of this is because advanced economies actually have been, talking about climate instead of looking at structural reforms and things like that. And then the other part, of course, is that when you sort of get very, very high levels of debt, you end up actually, all the bad things then happen, right? All the other bad things that happen. But in general, you sort of see is that you don't see emerging markets and developing economies doing the sort of reforms that we were expecting them to do, especially over the last decade or so. Okay, go on to the next section, Joe. Thank you.
Private investment, this one?
No, just keep going. Just keep going.
This one?
Yeah, I just want to show you a few slides here. Keep going, Joe. So, we do a lot of work on middle income countries. And if you look at this slide over here, it says to get rich is hard. So middle income countries, I think that Surjit may have seen this slide earlier, but basically take a look at 1983 when Surjit was trying to get me out of India and go to a good university in the US. Take a look at that share. Look at that share for middle income countries excluding China. This is the per capita income of middle income countries relative to the US, okay? So that was around 6%, Charan, right? And if you go fast forward to 2022, it's 6% still. Okay, so any catch up over there you sort of see is actually China. And by the way, if you take India out of that blue thing, it'll actually would have come down. Okay. So basically what you sort of see is that other than India and China and perhaps a few other countries, the median middle income country has actually not caught up at all to the US. Okay. Keep going, Joe. And this is the reason why. I mean, basically what you sort of see is in general, and this is the part about the middle income trap, Charan, I mean, basically what you sort of see is when we did this work in the World Development Report that we did about a year ago, after 2 years of work, basically what you see is that if you look at, you have to define what a slowdown is, but if you do define that fairly consistently, what you see is that middle income countries 3 times more likely to experience a slowdown than high income economies. And the second chart is super important, I think, and this actually basically a chart in the middle, essentially the part in blue is our calculations of physical and human capital of the median middle income country relative to the US, and that's about 70%. Okay, this surprised us, this number. So it's about 2/3 essentially. And then if you look at the output per worker in a middle income country relative to the US, you find that is about 20%. Okay, so if physical capital and human capital were the things that really mattered, then the typical middle income country would have output per worker, which would be about 2/3. In fact, it's less than a fifth. Okay, so essentially what you sort of see, that 50 percentage point gap is essentially the fact that middle income countries are much less efficient. Okay, and then we get into this stuff. We say, how efficient are they at using capital? How efficient are they at using talent? How efficient are they at using energy? They are much less. They have less of these things, of course, as compared to high income economies. But what's really striking is that they are much less efficient in converting these things into output as compared to high income countries. And that's the real crux of a middle income economy. It needs to change its structures It needs to improve. I mean, how do you actually improve efficiency? You have to improve efficiency by finding better ways to combine labor and capital and other things and energy and so on, and converting them into output. And one of the key ways that you do this is, of course, you learn how to do these things from countries that are more advanced than you. And the way that you do that, of course, is that you end up trading with them. You end up having FDI and so on, and as a result of that, you get that know-how. China was absolutely excellent at that. But now take a look at the third chart over there. If you sort of look at the headwinds that these countries are facing now, they are massive. I mean, this is because of China. Essentially, what has happened is that advanced economies and others have started to sort of become much more restrictive on trade policies. And by the way, it's not just advanced economies, because then you find that larger countries like Indonesia, like India, and so on, they actually also become much more restrictive in terms of things. So if you want to sort of look at if you want to apportion blame, you basically, the best way to sort of think about which are the countries. And by the way, these numbers are not for 2025. These numbers on the right, they are for 2023. So you can keep talking about Trump and say he did all of this stuff. This is not true. This was happening. This was happening before Trump came back into office. Okay, and so what you sort of see over here is that. The best way that I would actually summarize this is that if you want to look for culprits, look at the G20 economies. If you want to look at victims, look at small economies everywhere else. So you've got about the G20 countries, there are about 30 of them or something like that. And then you've got 150 countries, small economies, they're all getting hammered as a result of this. And by the way, most of those countries have been, even during this time, they've actually done more trade liberalizing reforms than trade restricting reforms. Okay. I don't want to go too much in. I would rather take questions, but if you keep going, Joe, just go to the last section if you can. I just want to show the last 3 slides. Yeah, these over here. No, actually, just keep going further. Keep going. I think I just want to show the last section. Yeah. So no. Go back up 2 or 3 slides. Go to the last section. What to do, basically. Yeah, right here. Okay. No. Top 3 things. Okay. So what should a country like India do? All right. Essentially, what I would say 3 things. The first one is economic freedom. Just allow enterprises to grow, to restructure, and to shut down, right? And if you sort of look at this, you find that countries that do this, countries that increase economic freedom, they are doing quite well. And you actually start to see in their firm dynamics. So compare India and compare Vietnam, and then compare a third country and compare both of them with the US. And what you see is that if you look at the size of a firm by age, right? Essentially what you see is that in the US, a firm that has been around for, let's say, 20, 30 years, it's 5 to 7 times the size that it started. Okay. If you look at India, it is pretty much the same size as when it started. Okay. So basically, if you're talking about employment and so on, Surjit, it's not small firms that add employment. It's young, dynamic firms, And young, dynamic firms means that basically what happens is that, because these countries don't have as much capital and talent and energy and so on, you don't want that locked up in a firm that is not adding value. You want firms that are not adding value to shut down and free up those resources so that firms that are actually higher value added firms can grow. Okay, if you look at Vietnam, Surjit, it's amazing to see that its trajectory of its firms is starting to look like that of the US. Okay, so that's one thing that is super important. The second thing is, if you look at equal opportunity, I know economists tend to sort of not talk about this enough. I think Surjit is an exception. Okay, but economists don't talk enough about this. If you reduce discrimination, and I think that the discrimination is greatest against women. If you reduce that, you find that you'll get a huge gain. So, for example, if you look at this one here, so this is from a 2019 Econometrica paper, Sujit. So this is not World Bank propaganda, okay? It's from a 2019 Econometrica paper by Shea and others. And essentially what they did was they actually tried to sort of they tried to quantify what were the gains to the US economy of cutting down discrimination, essentially. So essentially what you sort of see is in the 50s and 60s and 70s, 90% of doctors and lawyers in the US were white men. And if you look at that today, that ratio is less than half that. And then what they try to do is they try to simulate and they say, okay, let's say that if you actually kept discrimination at 1960 levels, what would the US GDP be? It would have looked a lot more like the GDP per capita of Japan or Germany and so on, right? It's actually a third higher, between a quarter and a third higher because of eliminating this. Joe, can you go to the slide before this? I just want to show that one quick one. This one over here. So if you look at the index of economic freedom, this is from Heritage House, I think. So basically what you sort of see is that you see the yellow line for Vietnam, right? If you look at that, you sort of see that over the last decade or so or less, Vietnam has really improved this a lot. Okay, India is that blue line over there. It's not changed that much at all. Okay, and you can quibble about what these measures and all are saying, but you can actually, because you see the effects of these things in firm dynamics in Vietnam as compared to India and Brazil and so on. But in a sense, what is happening over here is Vietnam is changing neighborhoods. It's going from the kind of environment for firms that Brazil and Nigeria and India have, to one that Mexico and Korea and others have. Okay, so it's basically moving to another thing. Go down, Joe. The third part is the open nice part. I just want to sort of stop with this slide. So, if you look at this slide, I'm sorry that's a bit complicated, but I think it's an important slide. So the way to read this slide is, if it's red, it means that a country imposes a higher tariff for that product, for a group of products, on US imports into that country than the US does on its than what the US does on imports from that country. If you look at the green part is where the US actually has a higher tariff on that country than that country has on the US, right? So basically, if you see a lot of reds over there, it means that that country has preferential access, in a sense, to the US. Okay. Now just look at the top 4 bars. All right. So those are low-income countries. Like most of them are in Africa, and you sort of see that, of course, they are imposing much higher. That U.S. Exports to those countries face much higher tariffs than their exports into the U.S. Then you look at lower middle-income countries like India, same thing. Then you look at upper middle-income countries like China, same thing. Then you look at high-income economies like the EU, same thing. Okay, this was in 2023. All right. 2024. Okay. Now, if you look at this and you say, is this something that these countries should, expect that that they'll still have this same situation over the next decade and so? No chance. And what you sort of see now, what's happening right now is essentially a reaction to this. I mean, we can talk more about this, but essentially this is what it is. I think that for these countries, they would just have to become much, much more open. I know that there has been this discussion in India and so on, I mean, about agriculture. But, last year, if you looked at this last year, you found that Indian exports of agriculture into the US had a tariff rate of 4%, and US exports of agriculture into India had tariffs of 64%. Okay, this cannot this cannot go on forever. Back to you, Surjit.
Thank you very much, Indermit. Let me just ask Charan, how much time do we have?
Sir, it's such an interesting discussion. I myself have a couple of questions for him. I leave it to you as a chair. I think we can go at least 15 to 20 minutes more than what was our scheduled.
Yeah. So
if Indermit has to start his Friday, if he's willing.
I am absolutely willing. I'm absolutely willing.
Okay. No, fantastic. Because starting, I have a few comments. This is very rich, and therefore it raises a lot of questions, and I'm sure amongst the audience as well. I have 2 or 3 points. One, you should label your last slide as why is there Trump economics. This is what Trump is reacting to. And many of my friends don't, they just dismiss him for whatever reason, but it really endorses what Trump is doing and what he's been saying. So I don't know how politically correct it is for a World Bank economist to say that, but since I'm not there, I'm saying it. That's a Trump. I'm going to use that slide somewhere, I hope, and I'll call it, why is Trump doing what he is doing? And why, if you will, my personal view, right on Trump is what I've been saying to the Indians. So that's the first. Okay. Few more comments, and then I'll open it up for questions.
So I have a quick comment on that, Surjit. I had discussions in China and in India about these things. Okay, the largest lower middle income country and the largest upper middle income country. And they have no self-reflection about this issue. They blame it on one person, but it's not one person. This was a situation before Trump came.
Yeah.
Trump is a reflection of this chart. Trump is not the cause of it.
Yeah. No. 100%. I mean, we'll talk later, but I think that's where, I mean, that graph, that slide just says it all. And I think it's a fantastic slide. It takes a while to get to, but I think maybe break it up into 2 components. So I think for me, the entire presentation is that last slide. It really reflects what's going on in the world right now, captures it very, very well. And as you said, then break it up into India and China and their attitude. So now I had a couple of comments, and then on the general presentation in the first part, and then go into a few more comments, and then I'll open it up for discussion. I won't take more than 2 or 3 minutes. On the first set on why is growth accelerating, actual GDP, etc. I think more than AI, the biggest story in the world going around is decline in population growth rates. Which is fertility levels declining. So in other words, present parallel to your actual, it doesn't affect your investment. I have a comment on the investment to GDP ratios as well, but that's one slide. And I think the gap will be a lot less, but it's for, in other words, if you do the same charts in per capita, On investment, I think, and I've done this for India, etc., that investment goods prices have really been falling around the world by a very large amount. So therefore present, and what matters is, you being from Chicago, is that real price of investment or the real investment. And that share has been going up. So therefore puzzle is even more and might have to do with your tariffs and lack of openness, that we are not seeing the growth that we should be seeing, given that investment rates are actually going up. So that's the second point. Then I think a little expansion on the restricted trade measure, that also, which you said was from 2019, 600 to 2,900. And if that can be broken up by countries or something, it'd be fantastic. I mean, this is so rich. There are about 5 or 6 articles that I can think emanating from this. And, an index of which countries have been successful in development of the index in changing economic structure. This comes up, it's compelling, it's very important, and it comes up all the time. Last now, comments on India. So not much different than yours. What I don't think there is a single economist in the world who hasn't noted, and in India, the fact that we are an outlier, a very bad outlier. It almost gets you to the point where I think Raj Krishna on your knowledge proof or something. We know, everybody knows what needs to be done. So the political economy and the economic question is, why doesn't it happen? So I have an explanation for it, but I won't go into that. But I think it is compelling. Every country in the world moves ahead, and we are stuck in the same place for decades. So, but maybe some other people will have some. I want to open it up for questions. I'm trying to look over here and Charan, you go ahead, and yeah.
I also would like to mention, Indermit, can you look up the chat box? There are some very interesting questions. But if you can, otherwise I'll be happy to read them. I know you had a problem with your laptop today. My question, Indermit, first and foremost, I just want to thank you for your presentation. For a long time, we at EGROW had been working on Viksit Bharat, and Dr. Bhalla knows it. Now, we have been arguing for higher growth. 6.5% is not going to take us where we are aiming at. But I'm just going to read some statistics for you, which has been worrying me tremendously. In 1990, just before we were to start our reforms, per capita income in the US was $24,000. And in India, it was 371, right? 15 years after that, the per capita income in 2004 or maybe 2004, America was 41,000 and we were 624, just around double, but America had gone way ahead. In 2014, 10 years after that, Americans were at 55,000, we were at 1,500. In 2024, Americans per capita income is 86,000 and we are 2,800. The gulf is widening. And that gulf is widening not only between India and the US, is also widening between Germany and UK with the US. So that means Americans have been galloping ahead in productivity.
Yeah.
And today, I think that slide of yours gives an excellent answer as to what is that so special in the US that the productivity has been galloping. So I think thank you for that. And I myself am so worried that even if we grow, given the gulf that I've shown you, that there's a gulf of 82,000 crore, 82,000 per capita income per year. Even if I grow at 10%. Now to close that gap is going to become a challenge. I don't know if you have some ideas on the growth pattern. Now, why I ask you is, despite the effort for the last 3 years, public investment and credit goes to the government. Between COVID, they jacked up the public investment. And I thought they'll be crowding in. It didn't. Until today, the private investment is shy of coming into the system. Now, I do not know how much of in-depth study you did on India. I'm not sure because yours must have been the overall picture. But if you have some insights on that, I really like you to think about it. I was also worried, and I'm
So on
also
the last one, what I can do is I can send you my slides on India, which I
okay.
did, which I think it was called "Will India hit high income before it hits 100," which is essentially a thing, and it's going to be a tough thing anyway. Yeah.
Yeah, it's going. That's exactly
And by
what
the way,
I was
when we
worried.
say high income at the World Bank, we are very frugal about it. I mean, we are talking 15,000. So when a country hits high income, it still has a per capita income that's just a fraction of that of the US. The US is about 80 something, 15,000 is high income, so it's a very frugal definition. Yeah.
So the problem is that USA is not the highest per capita income. There are still countries higher than that. So even the comparison is becoming so
That's
sharper.
true. That's true. That is true, Charan. But if you add up the population of the countries that have a per capita income higher than the US, it's not that much.
True,
It's about 20,
Luxembourg
30
and
million.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
It's very
that I
small.
agree with you. Okay, now my one more quick observation and then my last question, if you permit me, just very quick. Now you were right, Indermit. I also have friends in Europe, and I was telling them, while 50% is on us, the Trump tariff, and we have done 6 webinars on Trump tariff and India, and we are doing one more where we are doing Trump tariff and industry in November, and focused on industry. But I have a feeling even the Europeans, quote unquote, were taking America for a ride in terms of tariffs. So it's not only the LIC or countries in this part of the world, even the close partners up there were taking America for a ride. So I'm in a way trying to substantiate the fact that it is not just one man who came on the scene, it was a pent up pressure which suddenly has found a outlet now and this. But my question is, should the correction be so radical, or should the correction be in a phased manner? Because you would kill globalization and multilateralism by this very virtue of taking a hardcore jump into the tariffs. This same purpose can be achieved over a gradual movement of raising of tariffs. This would not disrupt the global economy, which was already suffering badly, not because of anyone else, but America's Lehman Brothers and the COVID. And therefore, at this stage, without disrupting the growth rate, would it not have been better to do it in a gradual phased manner? Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you.
So I can quickly respond to these things. I won't take more than a minute, Surjit. One is US versus others. If you look at the last decade, you're absolutely right. Other advanced economies have basically not really grown at all. It's just the US. And if you take out the US from the advanced economy thing, it looks terrible. The second part of it is you're absolutely right. There's something about the US private sector. When I come to India and I talk with my relatives, and they always tell me, "Oh, the US is a declining power." And so I always ask them, "Is the US private sector doing badly?" And they said, "No, the US private sector is actually the largest in the world and perhaps the most dynamic." So I said, "That's what makes the US a power. It's not the public sector. Nobody tries to imitate the US public sector. Nobody sort of comes up with, nobody comes up with gerrymandering and so on as a model. But the US private sector is so dynamic and is not a thing. And it's very good at managing uncertainty. It finds a way to convert that into risk and then manage the darn thing, So that's the second thing. If you look at a typical US state, Surjit, I mean, if you look at Mississippi and Alabama, they have the same per capita income they have the same per capita income as Germany and France, So yeah, I mean, and we think of those states as doing really poorly. That's the difference between those states. I mean, that's the difference between the US and those things. Trump tariffs. Just a quick thing, Surjit. What we are also doing is we are looking at non-tariff barriers now.
Yeah.
Those are harder to measure, but I'll send you some stuff on that one too. It's not just the tariffs that it was not just the tariffs that were higher on US exports to those countries. Non-tariff barriers are massive, especially in the services sector in East Asia. So it is actually the game now will switch to non-tariff barriers. And if you look at, I think a really good book for Indians to read is this book by Robert Lighthizer from a year or so ago. Read that, and I think he does a very good explanation of Trump's trade policies thing. Now, the important thing though is your point about should the correction be so radical? It shouldn't. You're right, but corrections seldom. I mean, successful corrections are seldom not radical. So you will have to have some kind of a correction like this, and then perhaps a swing back to the middle afterwards, because that's the way change is made. Otherwise, because the status quo has so many forces going for it. So you need somebody to come in and think. Even in India, it's not always the same person who creates as the one who destroys, right? So I think even in our trilogy, we have, Anyway, back to Surjit.
I just, on that same thing, and then you can respond. And I wanted to respond to Charan's question on gradualism, and would like to get your comments. The only successful reform in India is 1991. And by no stretch of the imagination was it gradual. The reason I think, Charan, gradualism doesn't work, it gives enough time for the enemies or the deep state, if you will, to gather forces and prevent any reform, like what happened in the farm laws. Now, one question here, and see what is thinking at the World Bank. One question by Jyoti Kumar on how to regulate the freebies culture in India. So any comments? And I mean, there was just an announcement yesterday by Nitish Kumar that, or maybe it was Tejashwi Yadav, that we will provide a job, a government job to every household. And Nitish Kumar saying he's going to give 20,000 rupees to every woman and calling it women entrepreneurship. I mean, what's your thinking and thinking at the bank about this freebies culture gone wild? And the unfortunate part is that Modi was the first one, Prime Minister Modi was the first one to say that we have to put a stop to it, but it doesn't look like any stop is happening, whether in his own party or in his alliance or the opposition. What to do, as Lenin said?
So I'm going to pass on that question because I don't. You guys know better how to stop that. I don't know enough about India to tell you that. Okay.
Well, you know that Surjit was before the one nation, one election. And the argument that he proposed there was that this will in a way curtail the freebie culture. And he was with the parliamentarians, and I think that's a very valid argument he proposed to them. Yeah. Surjit has written a piece very recently, should be in the newspapers, where I'm saying for the central government, one day, for all the state governments put together 2.5 years later, and all the local bodies put together 1 year later. So have 3 phases of election, and therefore their issues are different. The focus should be retained. Probably that will curtail the freebie culture, but you are right. It's a very, very vexed issue. With the best intentions, you get sucked into the whole cycle again and again. Sir, I just wanted to quickly say I totally agree. 1991 was a very strong, radical change we brought in. But here we are talking of the biggest country, biggest economy of the world, and their actions impact each one of us on the planet. And therefore, I was thinking the magnanimity of that country, which also grew rich because of the contribution from the rest of the world, would have expected that the gradual approach is adopted rather than the radical approach. That was my limited point I wanted to make.
So before I hand it over to you Indermit, on the last part where I think you can comment on, I quite disagree with my good friend Charan that I think that this, give more time, this, that, etc. No, I think this history will recognize Trump for forcing governments to readjust and look at the effects already. I think he had two goals. One was to increase defense expenditures by his allies. They have already done that. So that wouldn't have happened, acha, increase it by 0.5% this year or that year. That has already happened. The second real adjustment that he wanted to do, he hasn't succeeded in it so far, so we'll see. But I don't know whether Indermit can speak on it. He should. Is I think it was oriented towards that China's very restrictive, policy in terms of trade, where it's all done for China's benefit and not for anybody else's. So I think the battle is between the US and China, and all of us are in the middle. But in the end, I think all of us will benefit. Now, over to you, Indermit.
So back in 2018, Surjit, I actually wrote a blog on Brookings called "Trusting Trump on Trade." Okay, take a look at that because actually I found that at that time, if you sort of just see what was happening in China and so on, that was an unsustainable situation, and then if you see so basically under Bob Lighthizer, the US Trade Representative's Office did some very good work that actually quantified the damage that was being done to the US from essentially restrictive policies, the non-tariff barriers, but also theft of intellectual property and things like that, okay? And it was a massive amount. It was in the hundreds of billions of dollars per year, okay? So it wasn't small amount, right? So that was the one thing. And I think at that point, the IMF, the World Bank, and the WTO, and all needed to sort of, get off their behinds and call this stuff out, because it was not good for the world or even for China for this thing to continue, because that's the kind of correction you get. So then the first Trump administration actually put in place many of these policies and so on. But Surjit, what happened was that there was cheating even after that. So there was a lot of trade diversion through third countries like Vietnam, like Mexico, and so on.
Philippines.
Sorry?
And Philippines.
And the Philippines, but Mexico especially, a massive amount of Chinese, just to take advantage of the North American free trade area. So I think for all of those reasons, I think, and by the way, the same thing was true in the case of Europe too. There were a lot of restrictions. Some of them were tariffs, some of them were non-tariff barriers. Okay, so I think that what the world has got as a result of it is essentially, I guess, in some sense, very well deserved. Now, I think the problem now, of course, is what next and so on. And the thing, Surjit, that happens is that the small economies really get screwed. Okay, and there are 150 of them, and pretty much all of the economies in Africa are small economies, you know. So I think that one of the things to think about is also to sort of say, okay, what does, you know, I think one needs to start to become a little bit more discriminating and say, for the small economies like the ones in Africa, the US had a very nice policy, which was the African Growth and Opportunity Agreement, right? And and I think AGOA, which just expired a couple of weeks back. So those kind of things need to come in. And then I think Charan, you're right that I think for countries like India and so on, perhaps these agreements should these agreements ought to these agreements ought to be something that actually give a ramp that is not so steep, you know. But but essentially my sense is that, you know, why are these things being done quickly? Because based on the experience of the first Trump administration and what happened after that, I think there is a legitimate concern that people are just trying to wait this administration out, or they'll try to wait this administration out. That's part of the reason for what Surjit said, that these things have to be done quickly, right? But lots of I mean, I think that to go back to the public debt issue, public debt right now is being used to finance public consumption. Okay, and I mean, you're talking about freebies and stuff like that. That's the problem. The problem is, you know, it's fine if you use it for public investment, but that's not the case in many of these countries. And so I think it's not just India that has a freebie culture. The freebie culture is pretty much everywhere, and I think that one needs to come back to the basics, like, you know, don't. I mean, basically, the Washington Consensus was not a bad consensus at all. It was spot on. You know? Don't spend
No,
more, don't spend more than you can afford. Yeah.
but you know, and then I want to end, but I think on that note on Washington Consensus, I think, and I, you know, have done research on it and published it, etc. The country that destroyed the Washington Consensus was China. So by its deeply undervaluing its currency, dominating markets, China does not play by any market rules. So therefore, it's very tough to compete with China. And recently, the US administration has realized that the one rare earth company, MP, that the US has bought a stake in it, the government has bought a stake in the company. And as you saw in Intel, the US has bought a stake. So I think maybe those are the lessons that we learn from China. That listen, in order to fight or in order to play against China, got to learn the Chinese rules of the game and then adapt to that, which is what I think is happening in the world right now. But really, this has been the most enjoyable, entertaining seminar, lots of discussion. So I want to give you time also. And Charan, over to you.
Indermit, of course, I totally agree with our chairman for the session that this has been a really interesting one. But here are a few thoughts I want to just submit to you, because you are coming out with such excellent publications every 6 months. So one thought is on freebies, if you could really catalog and say what other countries are doing with their freebie culture, and what is the multilateral institution, World Bank and IMF, guiding them in, so that global picture emerges that these really don't end up in enhancing welfare, but it takes them down the drain, which best avoided. The second issue that I think, because the global debate on it, and there's a global disruption taking place because of Trump economics, my thought was, is there a possibility of making an assessment that is the world really cheating America or Americans? And did the world really take America for a ride? Or was it a mutual thing? While the rest of the world was contributing significantly in the growth, productivity, and efficiency of America, it sort of was then America sharing the tariff concessions. So if there is an analytical study which not only looks at net international liabilities and net international assets, which is traditionally done by we economists. Oh, this is the external debt. These are the international borrowings. These are the international investments. So net international position is this. There's a traditional way of we looking at it, but I think an in-depth study which assesses how the rest of the world contributed to America's growth, efficiency, and productivity, and how then America accommodated that by being little soft or blind to the tariffs that you mentioned. And I also know about it, that there has been a sort of a discriminating behavior on tariffs. So if that sort of study comes up, maybe it'll be an eye-opener for both the Americans and for the rest of the world. And it'll convince them that, look, while we keep thinking that we contributed to America's wealth, after all, the international reserve currency enjoys so much of benefit, which
Yes.
America has been enjoying. So that will really help us. By the way, the Lehman Brothers time also, it was the international reserve currency status which bailed America out. Had there been any other country, it would have been another Malaysia, Philippines, or Korea. So Indonesia, like the Asian tigers. And now that we have a backup currency in terms of euro, which is also an international currency, and China pushing its way into it, maybe a correct assessment is presented to the world. And if that can be done, that'd be a big favor. I really want to thank you, Indermit, for being with us. I want to thank you, Sir Surjit, sir, for being with us, chairing this session, and to all the people in the audience, participants who have been raising such important questions in the chat box. As I mentioned, such an important issue. Everybody has limitations to say what to say and what not to say. That was so clearly visible today. Totally appreciate that fact. But within those contours and limitations, both of knowledge and the times, I think we have had an excellent open-ended discussion. So I want to thank each one of you. And Joseph, I really don't know you, but thank you very much for chipping in and playing the role of the host in playing down the slides that you so beautifully did for us. With that, let me close today and invite you for our next webinar next Friday, where again, I'll send you the flyer, where again we'll be touching another contemporary issue and discuss it at length, like the way we are doing today. Just want to make one very quick announcement. Each one of us wants to grow. Each one of us cherishes to grow faster and further. In India, there is an author by the name Shiv Khera. He always says, how do you want to win? He has mantras, he has formulas, how to win. On October 24, we have invited Shiv Khera to consider India as an entity, a country, and tell us how India should win in this galaxy of nations. So 4:30 to 5:30 will be Shiv Khera talking to us on October 24. Once again, looking forward to your participation next week. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Charan. Thank you, Surjit. Thank you, Joe.
I'm just downloading your paper on trusting Trump on trade. So.